Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Office Hours Politics Edition. I'm your host, Sienna Ali, and today I want to start with something that will make people uncomfortable. But if you listen to this podcast, you're already past comfort politics. We live in an era of representation worship. Every political cycle, every cabinet reshuffle, every corporate announcement, we get told the same thing. This is historic. This is progress. This is what change looks like. The first woman, the first Black president, the first racialized vice president, the first gender balanced cabinet. And the expectation is that we're supposed to clap and then shut up. And we do. But here's the problem. We have more representation than ever before. And yet, the systems doing harm have never been more entrenched. Wars continue. Prisons expand, borders harshened, colonial extractions deepened, capital contracts. So today we're asking a very simple question that somehow feels taboo. If representation is liberation, why does nothing materially change? And more importantly, why does liberal politics need us to believe it has? This episode is about women and people of color in power. Not as individuals, but as political instruments. Not to deny racism or sexism, not to deny the emotional power of visibility, but to be brutally honest about how power works. Let's start with the ideology. Liberalism tells a very specific story about injustice. It says racism exists because of prejudice. Sexism exists because of exclusion. Colonialism exists because of outdated attitudes. So the solution becomes inclusion, diversity, and access, not dismantling, not redistribution. Political philosopher Charles Mills explains this in The Racial Contract. He argues that the liberal democracy was never race neutral. It was designed around a silent agreement that white elites would rule and the others would be managed. So when liberal states incorporate women and people of color, they don't see it as a threat. They see it as proof of legitimacy. Representation becomes evident that the system is fair. Inequality is accidental. Those who fail simply didn't try hard enough. That's why liberalism is obsessed with firsts. Firsts allow the system to declare victory without changing anything. Now, here's the part people don't want to admit. The system doesn't elevate the most racialized woman. The system doesn't elevate the most radical people. It elevates the most compatible. This is what sociologists call elite incorporation. The progress looks like you reward those who adopt the language of moderation. You punish those who demand structural change. You promote those who believe in working within the system. So women and people of color who rise tend to believe in capitalism, believe in the state, believe in empire, even if they say they don't like it. This isn't personal failure, it is structural filtering. As Frantz Fanon warned, colonial systems don't disappear. They change managers. You replace white rulers with a native elite, and suddenly violence looks less violent. Different body, same boot. Okay, and honestly, we need to talk about Barack Obama, because this episode was inspired by him. Obama is not just a politician. He is a symbol. He represents redemption. He represents progress. He represents the idea that America fixed itself. But let's talk about what actually happened under Obama. Drone warfare expanded massively. Civilian casualties were reframed as collateral damage. Libya was destroyed. Afghanistan and Iraq continued. Deportations hit record levels. Obama didn't dismantle imperial power. He humanized it. As Hannah Arendt reminds us, systems don't require evil villains. They require administrators. Obama was empire's perfect administrator. Calm, educated, articulated, respectable. Representation doesn't stop violence. It made violence easier to accept. Now let's talk about Kamala Harris. Kamala is sold as a feminist, progressive, a woman of justice, a win for women of color, a win for women. But her career was built in like, honestly, just a preposterous way. As a California AG, she defended mass incarceration, she resisted prison reform, and she upheld violent policing. This type of feminism uses empowered language to expand punishment. And Bell Hooks said very plainly that feminism that aligns with domination is not liberation. Putting a woman of color in charge of cages doesn't make the cages feminist. It makes it harder to critique. Now we can move on to Canada. Canada loves to pretend it's different. It loves to be different. Canada is kinder, nicer, more progressive. Look at the visuals. We have gender balanced cabinets. We have racial diversity. We have land acknowledgements. But under Justin Trudeau, Indigenous land defenders are criminalized. Extractive projects proceed without consent of Indigenous people. Arms are sold. Policing and prisons expanded. This is settler colonialism with a progressive face. Racialized ministers don't dismantle the settler state. They administer it. Representation becomes a moral insulation. Now, why do we keep falling for this? Well, political theorist Nancy Fraser offers us some answers. She explains what's happening almost perfectly. Modern liberal politics prioritizes recognition over redistribution. We talk endlessly about identity, visibility, representation, but we avoid wealth transfer, land back, decolonization. Representation feels good. Liberation feels threatening. So the system offers us the former to avoid the latter. Now let's talk about what liberation would actually look like. Liberation is not first without change, diversity without power, women managing violence. Liberation requires structural transformation, redistribution, abolishment of violent institutions, and decolonization of the law and the land. Representation can matter, but only after there's a power shift. Before that, it really is just optics. Pretty much wraps up the politics of this episode, but I also think that we need to talk about how this logic of representation spills out of the world of politics into the media, celebrities, and then the legal systems. Because if representation can legitimize empire and policing, it can also legitimize violence, abuse, and impunity, especially when the person at the center is framed as a symbolic racial victory. Now we're going to get really uncomfortable. There is a very specific narrative that shows up again and again in the American media model. A Black man becomes extraordinarily wealthy, famous, or powerful. He is framed as a racial breakthrough. His success is treated as collective racial progress. Criticisms of him are framed as racial betrayal or racism. And when allegations emerge, especially allegations involving violence, abuse, or exploitation, representation becomes a shield. Not justice, not accountability, a shield. And this is not an anti-Black analysis. This is an analysis of how racial symbolism is exploited by power. Let's talk about OJ Simpson. The OJ Simpson trial wasn't just a murder trial. It was a racial spectacle. OJ wasn't just OJ. He was framed as a Black man who made it, a symbol of racial success, proof that Black excellence could transcend white institutions. And because of the history of racist policing, wrongful convictions, which are real, the trial became less about the evidence and more about what the verdict symbolized. The question quietly shifted from did he do it to what does convicting him say about America? Representation politics turned the courtroom into a stage of racial redemption. And the result, a man with immense wealth, celebrity status, and legal resources walked free. Not because the system suddenly became fair, but because racial symbolism distorted accountability. This is crucial. The problem was not that race was discussed. The problem was that representation replaced justice. OJ was not judged as a powerful man accused of violence. He was judged as a racial symbol. And symbols are protected. Now we can fast forward and talk about Sean Combs or Diddy. Without getting into the outcomes or asserting guilt, we can analyze how the media framed power, celebrity, and race in cases involving Black elites. What do we see repeatedly? Narratives like he built an empire, he changed the culture, he represents Black success. They're trying to tear him down. Again, criticism becomes racialized, accountability becomes suspect, victims are sidelined. And this is where representation politics becomes actively dangerous. Because the logic becomes, if we hold this person accountable, what does this say about Black progress? Which is a false and violent question. Justice is not a racial betrayal. Accountability is not oppression, and wealth does not equal liberation. And these media institutions love these cases because they collapse structural analysis into individual drama. Instead of asking, how does capital protect abusers? How does celebrity status distort justice? How does the patriarchy operate across race? We get, is this good or bad for Black representation? What does this mean symbolically? Is this a setback? And suddenly women, especially Black women, disappear entirely from the conversation. The harm becomes abstract, the victims become footnotes, and the man becomes a story. This is not liberation politics. This is spectacle politics. So here's the core point. Representation does not negate patriarchy. Representation does not neutralize capital. It doesn't dissolve violence. A Black man with money, lawyers, and institutional protection is still a man with power operating inside patriarchal systems. And when the media frames him primarily as a racial symbol, it actively protects them. And this is the same logic we've been talking about all episode. We just are moving from parliament to courtrooms, cabinet to celebrities, state power to media power. So when representation becomes the metric, terrible things can happen. Survivors are silenced to protect the community. Violence is minimized to preserve symbolism. Wealthy men evade accountability. Powerful masquerades are progress. And the most marginalized people, women, poor people, victims, pay the price. And this is not accidental, it's structural. And we've said this all episode long. The system doesn't care what you look like. They care what you protect. So when we say representation isn't liberation, what we mean is not just in politics, not just in parliament, but in courts, in media, in celebrity culture, in who is getting protected, who is getting erased. So the next time a woman, a person of color, rises to power, and we're told that this is progress, I want you guys to ask who still profits, who still dies, who still owns land, and who controls the violence. Liberation is not about who sits at the table, it's about who built the table and who it was built to serve. Until next week, guys, stay curious, stay politically aware, and never confuse representation with freedom. Bye, guys.